He didn't see a waitress. He saw a smudge on the pristine canvas of his evening. A minor, insignificant detail that was out of place. She stood before his table, a small notepad in her hand, her uniform simple but immaculate. To Sterling Blackwood, a man who measured the world in acquisitions and stock prices, she was nothing more than a function, a pair of hands to deliver his $500 bottle of Chateau Margaux. He didn't just want his wine. He wanted her to feel the cavernous gap between his existence and hers. He would belittle. He would threaten. He would drop the names of culinary gods and real estate moguls to bend the entire establishment to his will. He was certain he was the most powerful man in the restaurant, perhaps in the entire city block. He was catastrophically wrong. He had no way of knowing that the quiet young woman he was about to systematically dismantle wasn't just another struggling 20-something earning minimum wage. She was the one woman on earth with the singular power to extinguish the coveted stars that made restaurants like this one legendary, the very stars he so desperately craved. And by the time the dessert course was supposed to arrive, his meticulously constructed empire was about to begin its spectacular, public collapse. This is the story of the dinner reservation that changed everything. The autumn air in Manhattan was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts and ambition. Inside the Gilded Quill, one of New York's most revered dining temples, the atmosphere was a carefully orchestrated symphony of hushed conversations, the gentle clinking of silverware on porcelain, and the distant, rhythmic ballet of the open kitchen. The lighting was low and intimate, making every table feel like a private world. It was a place where deals were sealed, anniversaries were celebrated, and fortunes were spent on a single plate of food. Elara Vance, known to her colleagues for the past 3 weeks simply as Leah, moved through this world with a quiet efficiency that belied her inexperience. At 24, with her dark hair pulled back into a severe but practical bun and a face that was more observant than expressive, she blended into the background, which was precisely the point. She polished a water glass, her movements precise, her eyes scanning the room, absorbing details others missed, the slight wobble on Table 7's leg, the way the formidable Mrs. Astor always angled her chair away from the air vent, the subtle tension in the shoulders of the restaurant's manager, Julian Croft. To the other staff, Leah was an enigma. She was a quick study, unnervingly so. She had memorized the entire wine list, all 400 bottles, in 2 days. She could identify the faint notes of saffron and star anise in Chef Dubois' signature bisque from 5 feet away. When a tourist had asked about the history of the building, a landmarked 19th-century bank, Leah had given a 5-minute, historically accurate account that left the seasoned maître d' speechless. They assumed she was a culinary student, or perhaps an aspiring historian paying her dues. No one could have guessed the truth. Elara was not a waitress. She was an heiress to a throne she never wanted. Her late father, Arthur Vance, had been the founder and sole arbiter of the Aurelian Star Syndicate, the most powerful and secretive culinary authority in the world. An Aurelian star wasn't just a review, it was a coronation. A single star could turn a humble bistro into a gold mine. The loss of one could shutter a legendary institution. When Arthur had passed away 6 months ago, the directorship, by the immutable laws of the syndicate's charter, had passed to his only child. Elara felt like a fraud. She had grown up around fine dining, yes, but she had studied art history. She knew brush strokes, not knife skills. To honor her father's legacy, she felt she had to understand his world, not from the top down, but from the bottom up. So, she had created Leia, a blank slate, and embarked on a secret pilgrimage, working her way through the kitchens and dining rooms of starred restaurants across the country. The Gilded Quill, with its 2 coveted Aurelian stars, was her latest classroom. This wasn't just a job, it was a covert audit of the highest order. "Leah, table 12 is here," Julian's voice, low and strained, cut through her thoughts. "It's him." Ilara didn't need to ask who him was. The energy in the room had shifted, a subtle drop in temperature. Sterling Blackwood had arrived. Blackwood was a man who didn't walk into a room. He conquered it. At 55, he was a predator in a bespoke Brioni suit, his silver hair swept back from a face that seemed chiseled from granite and disdain. He was a corporate raider who had recently turned his voracious appetite to the restaurant industry. He didn't build restaurants. He acquired them, stripped them of their soul, and rebranded them as Blackwood Steakhouses. He was currently in aggressive negotiations to buy the Gilded Quill, a fact that had cast a pall over the entire staff. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 younger men in identical dark suits and a woman whose jewelry glittered with cold, hard fire. They moved like a phalanx, parting the sea of diners. "Julian, my friend," Blackwood boomed, his voice a gravelly assertion of dominance. He clapped Julian on the shoulder, a gesture that was more of a blow than a greeting. "The usual table, I trust? And none of that drafty nonsense by the window tonight?" "Of course, Mr. Blackwood. We have your preferred booth ready," Julian said, his smile as tight as a drum. He was a man in his late 40s, with the weary eyes of a career professional, fighting a losing battle. He loved the Gilded Quill. It was his life's work, the legacy of his mentor, the original owner. Selling to Blackwood felt like selling a child. Ilara watched as Julian led the party to the best table in the house, a plush, semicircular booth in a secluded alcove. It was in her section. A knot of apprehension tightened in her stomach. She had studied Blackwood's file. His reputation for treating service staff with contempt was legendary. This was going to be a trial by fire. She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and approached the table. "Good evening. My name is Leah, and I will be your server tonight. May I start you with some water, still or sparkling?" Blackwood didn't even look at her. He was busy barking into his phone. "I don't care what the zoning board says, Leonard. Demolish it. I want a glass box with my name on it by Christmas. Do you understand?" He snapped the phone shut and finally turned his gaze on Ilara. It felt like being pinned by an insect collector. Sparkling. San Pellegrino. And 4 glasses. No ice, with a single sliver of lime. Not a wedge. The peel must be exactly 2 millimeters thick. Can your mind comprehend that? Or do I need to draw you a diagram? He sneered. The woman beside him tittered. The 2 young men stared at their menus, their faces blank. "I understand perfectly, sir," Ilara said, her voice even. She made a note on her pad. She wasn't just writing down the order, she was documenting. Time: 7:15 p.m. Initial interaction, condescending, designed to establish dominance. The audit had begun. The evening descended from there. Every interaction was a test, a power play. The wine, a 2005 Pauillac, was presented. Blackwood sniffed the cork with exaggerated theatricality. "It's breathing a little tight. Did you decant this for precisely 45 minutes as per my reservation notes?" "Yes, sir. 46 minutes to be exact. I timed it," Ilara replied calmly. She had, in fact, overseen it herself, knowing that any deviation would be used as ammunition. He took a sip, swishing it in his mouth like mouthwash. Passable. Barely. When she delivered their appetizers, he stopped her, holding up a hand. He pointed a manicured finger at his plate of seared scallops. 1, 2, 3, 4. My plate has 4 scallops. Henderson's plate has 5. Are you running some sort of scallop-based caste system here? Am I in the 4-scallop caste? Chef Dubois plates by weight, sir, to ensure consistency. Not by count, Ilara explained, her patience a thin, tightly stretched wire. Excuses. Blackwood waved a dismissive hand. Bring me Henderson's 5th scallop. Put it on a separate plate. I want to look at it. Julian, who had been watching from across the dining room, started to move toward the table, his face a thundercloud. But Ilara gave him the slightest shake of her head. I can handle this, her look said. Julian paused, a conflict raging in his eyes. He was the manager. His job was to protect his staff. But confronting Blackwood could jeopardize the sale negotiations, which, ironically, might be the only way to keep the restaurant from going under and his staff employed. He felt trapped, a general forced to sacrifice a soldier to win a war. His hesitation, his brief moment of weighing commerce against courage, did not go unnoticed by Ilara. She filed that away too. The final act began with the main course. Ilara approached the table, carrying 2 plates of the restaurant's famed duck à l'orange. She moved with the grace she had cultivated over the past few weeks, a fluid economy of motion. As she leaned in to place the plate in front of Blackwood, one of the younger men, Henderson, gestured wildly while telling a story, his arm swinging out and catching her wrist. It was a small bump, almost insignificant, but it was enough. The plate tilted. A single, perfect drop of the rich, dark orange sauce flew through the air in a tragic arc and landed squarely on the pristine white cuff of Sterling Blackwood's French-cuffed shirt. The silence that fell over the table was absolute, a vacuum that sucked all the air out of the room. Blackwood stared at the small, brownish-orange stain as if it were a mortal wound. He looked from the stain to Ilara's face, and his expression, which had been a mask of cruel amusement, curdled into something truly venomous. You, he whispered, the word a sliver of ice. You clumsy, incompetent little girl. Do you have any idea what you've just done? He stood up, his chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. The entire dining room was now staring. This shirt, he said, his voice rising to a roar, is a custom-made Charvet. It costs more than you make in a month. This cufflink, he held up his wrist, displaying a platinum and sapphire bauble, is worth more than your entire pathetic life, and you have defiled it. Sir, it was an accident, Ilara said, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Mr. Henderson's arm. Do not blame my associate, Blackwood bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at her. You are the help. The fault is always yours. You are fired. Julian, he roared, his eyes scanning the room for the manager. Get over here now and fire this worthless creature. Julian rushed to the table, his face pale. Mr. Blackwood, please, let's not cause a scene. We can have the shirt professionally cleaned, of course. We will cover any and all expenses. Expenses? Blackwood laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You think this is about money? This is about respect. This is about competence. And this thing, he gestured at Ilara as if she were a piece of filth, has none. I am trying to decide whether to purchase this establishment, and you staff it with rejects from a soup kitchen. If she is not fired, right here, right now, in front of me, the deal is off, and I will personally call every supplier you have and make sure you can't get a fresh piece of fish in this city for the next year. I will ruin you. The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just a threat to Julian. It was a threat to the chefs, the bussers, the dishwashers. It was a threat to dozens of livelihoods. Ilara looked at Julian. She saw the sweat on his brow, the sheer terror in his eyes. He was a good man being crushed by an impossible choice. He opened his mouth, and she knew what he was going to say. He was going to sacrifice her. She couldn't blame him. It was the logical, pragmatic choice. But this was her audit, and the test had just escalated beyond service protocols into a question of fundamental ethics. "Julian, wait," she said, her voice quiet but clear. She turned her full attention to Sterling Blackwood. The fear she should have been feeling was replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. She was no longer Leah, the waitress. She was Ilara Vance, the director of the Aurelian Star Syndicate. And this man was not just a bully. He was a cancer in the industry she was now sworn to protect. "Mr. Blackwood," she began, her tone shifting. The subservience was gone, replaced by an unnerving authority. "You seem to believe that the value of a person is determined by the cost of their clothing." Blackwood was taken aback by her sudden change in demeanor. "I believe that competence is a virtue, one you sorely lack. Now get out of my sight before I have you physically removed." "I'm not going anywhere," Ilara said. She took a small step forward. "Tonight, you have threatened a business owner, verbally abused an employee, and attempted to leverage your financial power to enforce your will in a matter of a spilled drop of sauce. You have done this in a 2-star Aurelian establishment. That is a serious problem." Blackwood stared at her, then burst into laughter. "An Aurelian establishment? You're quoting restaurant guides to me. Little girl, I will own this establishment. I will own its stars. I will buy them, just as I buy everything else." "That's the thing about Aurelian stars, Mr. Blackwood," Ilara said, her voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial whisper. "They cannot be bought, but they can most certainly be lost." He scoffed, turning to Julian. "Are you hearing this? She's insane. Get her out of here and call security. I want her charged with harassment." He pulled out his phone, a sleek black monolith. "You know what? I'm not going to just ruin this place. I'm going to call my friend on the board of the Restaurant Association, Jonathan Hemlock. We play golf together at Shinnecock. By the time I'm done, this girl won't be able to get a job washing dishes in a back-alley diner in Queens. Let's see how brave you are when your entire future is blacklisted." He stabbed a number on his screen and put the phone on speaker for the entire room to hear. A wave of triumphant cruelty washed over his face. This was his ultimate weapon, the call to a higher power. Ilara's expression didn't change. It wasn't fear, it was anticipation. Jonathan Hemlock. She knew the name well. He wasn't just on the Restaurant Association board. He was one of the 12 secretive trustees of the Aurelian Star Syndicate, a trustee who reported directly to her. "Please do," Ilara said, her voice laced with a quiet irony that no one else could understand. "Call him." Blackwood sneered. "Oh, I will. You think I'm bluffing?" "I think," Ilara said, her eyes locking onto his, "that you are about to detonate a bomb in the middle of your own life. But by all means, press the button." The phone rang, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent dining room. 1 ring. 2 rings. "Sterling, what is it?" "I'm at the symphony," a voice answered, crisp and annoyed. It was indeed Jonathan Hemlock. "Jonathan, sorry to interrupt, but I have a 5-alarm fire over here. I'm at the Gilded Quill, and the service is an abomination. I've got some insolent little waitress who assaulted me, and the manager is useless. Her name is—" "What is it?" He glared at Ilara. "Leah," she supplied helpfully. "Leah?" Blackwood spat into the phone. "I need you to make a call. Put her on the city-wide blacklist. I want her career terminated, permanently." There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, pregnant pause. "Sterling?" Jonathan's voice had changed. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a note of confusion and dawning horror. "Describe this waitress to me." "What? Who cares what she looks like? She's nobody. Young, maybe 24, dark hair in a bun, average height." The silence stretched on. Then a choked sound came through the speaker. "Oh, God. Sterling, what did you do?" Jonathan's voice was a panicked whisper. "What is her last name? Tell me her last name." "I don't know her last name. She's a waitress," Blackwood yelled, his frustration mounting. "My name," Ilara said, her voice ringing out in the stillness, "is Vance. Ilara Vance." The phone was filled with the sound of a sharp, terrified intake of breath. The silence that followed was so profound it seemed to have a physical weight. Every diner, every staff member was frozen, watching the drama unfold. "Did you say Vance?" Jonathan's voice was trembling, barely audible. "Yes," Blackwood said, utterly bewildered. "What the hell is going on, Jonathan?" "Sterling, you monumental fool!" Jonathan's voice was now shaking with a mixture of terror and rage. "Listen to me. Apologize to her. Get on your knees and beg for her forgiveness. Do not say another word. Do you understand me? You have just insulted the single most powerful person in our entire world." Blackwood stared at the phone, then at Ilara. His arrogant smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion and fear. "Powerful? She's a child in an apron." Julian, standing beside him, was looking at Ilara with new eyes. Vance, the name echoed in his memory. Arthur Vance, the founder. He looked at Ilara's calm, observant face, the way she had handled the pressure, her encyclopedic knowledge. And the pieces clicked into place with the force of a thunderclap. His jaw went slack. "Mr. Blackwood," Ilara said, stepping forward. She reached into the small pocket of her apron, past her notepad and pen. She pulled out not a wallet, but a single, impossibly elegant business card made of heavy, cream-colored stock. The only thing on it was a name, Ilara Vance, and below it, a small embossed gold quill inside a circle of 12 stars, the symbol of the Aurelian Star Syndicate's directorship. She held it out to him. "I am not a waitress. I am the director of the Aurelian Star Syndicate. I am the person who inherited the authority to grant and to revoke every single one of our stars, worldwide." Sterling Blackwood's face, which had been flushed with rage, drained of all color. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. The phone in his hand slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered onto the floor. You're, he stammered, his voice a dry rasp. "I am," she confirmed, "and I am here on an official audit to evaluate whether the gilded quill is worthy of its 2 stars, an evaluation that includes not just the quality of the food, but the integrity of its management, the well-being of its staff, and the character of its clientele." She turned her cool gaze from Blackwood to Julian, who looked as if he might faint. "Julian, your staff performed with grace under extreme duress. You, however, were willing to terminate an employee to appease a bully. That is a mark against you." Then she looked back at Blackwood. "And you, Mr. Blackwood, you are not a patron. You are a poison. You represent everything my father fought against, the belief that money can buy taste, that power is a substitute for decency." A slow, delighted smile spread across her face. "You wanted me fired. You wanted me blacklisted. Instead, you have just given me the most comprehensive and damning evidence I could have ever hoped for." She looked around the silent, watching room. "The audit of the Gilded Quill is over, but my investigation into the Blackwood Restaurant Group is just beginning." The sound of the phone hitting the floor seemed to echo in the cavernous silence of the dining room. Sterling Blackwood stood frozen, his face a ghastly shade of white, resembling a statue of a man who had just been told the world was ending. The phone on the floor continued to squawk faintly. Jonathan Hemlock's panicked voice, a tinny, distant plea. Sterling, for the love of God, say something. Apologize." But Blackwood was speechless. His mind, a finely tuned machine for hostile takeovers and leveraged buyouts, had short-circuited. He looked at Elara, truly looked at her for the first time. The apron, the simple bun, the notepad, they were no longer the uniform of the working class. They were the disguise of royalty. He had not been berating a servant. He had been performing his own execution for a queen. It was Julian who broke the spell. The manager, who moments before had been a portrait of defeated pragmatism, was now galvanized. The terror in his eyes was replaced by a righteous fire he hadn't felt in years. He saw a path forward that wasn't paved with capitulation. He stepped between Blackwood and Elara, his posture no longer stooped, but ramrod straight. "Mr. Blackwood," Julian's voice was low, but it resonated with newfound strength. "I believe your dinner is concluded. Please, settle your bill for the items you've consumed, and then I must ask you to leave my restaurant." Blackwood flinched as if struck. "Your restaurant? You were just about to sell it to me." "The negotiations are terminated," Julian stated flatly. "The Gilded Quill is not for sale. Not to you. Not ever." The woman with the glittering jewelry began to gather her purse, her face a mask of horror and embarrassment. The two young associates, Henderson and the other, looked at their feet, wishing the floor would swallow them whole. They were detaching themselves from their boss's implosion with the speed of rats leaving a sinking ship. "You can't do this!" Blackwood finally found his voice, a desperate, cracking shout. I'll sue you for defamation, for entrapment." Elara let out a small, humorless laugh. "Entrapment, Mr. Blackwood? Did I force you to call a young woman a worthless creature? Did I compel you to threaten the livelihoods of an entire staff over a drop of sauce? No, that was all you. Every word was a choice, and every choice has a consequence." She turned to Julian. "There is no need to present him with a bill. His meal tonight is on the house. Consider it a final, parting gift from the establishment he so desperately wished to destroy." However, she added, her eyes glinting, "I would have security escort him from the premises. He is clearly a disruptive element." "With pleasure," Julian said. He nodded to the maitre d', who discreetly spoke into his lapel microphone. Blackwood's desperation curdled back into his default state, rage. "You think you've won? You're a child playing with your father's toys. I built an empire with my own 2 hands. I'll crush you. I'll crush this whole ridiculous, pompous little club of yours." 2 large security guards, formerly invisible in the restaurant's periphery, materialized at Blackwood's elbows. They were polite but immovable. "Sir, this way, please," one of them said. As they began to guide the sputtering billionaire toward the exit, something remarkable happened. A man at a nearby table, a quiet investor who had witnessed the entire exchange, started to clap. It was a slow, deliberate applause. Then, the woman he was with joined in. Across the room, Mrs. Astor, the formidable doyen of New York society, raised her champagne flute in a silent toast to Elara. Within seconds, the entire dining room, filled with the city's elite, the very people Blackwood sought to impress, erupted in sustained, thunderous applause. It wasn't for Elara, the director. It was for Leah, the waitress who had stood her ground. It was a collective release of disdain for a bully who had finally gotten his comeuppance. Sterling Blackwood was frog-marched through the restaurant, his face burning with a humiliation so profound it was almost radioactive. The sound of that applause would be the soundtrack to his nightmares for years to come. As the heavy oak doors of the Gilded Quill swung shut behind him, sealing him out in the cold Manhattan night, the atmosphere inside instantly transformed. The oppressive tension vanished, replaced by a giddy, electric sense of relief and victory. The staff, who had been frozen in place, began to move again, their faces alight with disbelief and joy. The sous-chef emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, a wide grin splitting his face. He walked straight to Ilara. "Mademoiselle Vance," he said, his French accent thick with emotion. "On behalf of the kitchen, thank you. You have saved this house." Ilara felt a blush creep up her neck. She was still wearing the simple black uniform, a smudge of sauce still visible on her apron. I only did what was right." Julian approached her, his expression a complex mixture of awe, gratitude, and deep shame. "Miss Vance? Ilara. I don't know what to say. I was about to." "I know what you were about to do, Julian," Ilara said, her voice softening. "You were about to make a difficult choice to protect your people. The fact that you were pained by it is what matters." The applause was a physical force, a wave of sound that washed over the room and seemed to polish the very air, clearing it of the toxic residue Blackwood had left behind. For a moment, Ilara Vance stood by table 12, a ghost in a waitress's uniform, feeling the vibration of it in the soles of her sensible shoes. It was not for her, not truly. It was for the catharsis of seeing a tyrant fall, a collective sigh of relief from a room full of people who, in their own worlds of boardrooms and benefit galas, had likely encountered a dozen Sterling Blackwoods. They were applauding the fantasy of consequence. She felt a strange sense of dislocation, as if watching a scene from a play in which she was an unwilling lead. The identity of Leah was dissolving, flaking away like old paint, and underneath was Ilara, raw and exposed. The staff stared at her, their expressions a dizzying cocktail of awe, confusion, and a newfound, unnerving deference. The sous-chef who had thanked her now seemed unable to meet her eyes. The busboy who had shared a joke with her in the service corridor an hour ago now looked at her as if she were a visiting monarch. She had wanted to understand their world, but in revealing herself, she had irrevocably separated herself from it. The glass wall she had sought to shatter had just been rebuilt, thicker and more soundproof than ever. Julian approached, his face a roadmap of conflicting emotions. "Miss Vance," he began, the name clumsy on his tongue. He had called her Leah 100 times. "I am so profoundly sorry. For my hesitation, for my weakness, Julian," she interrupted, her voice softer than she intended. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a hollow ache in its place. "Weakness is allowing a man like that to set the terms. Strength is what you do the moment you realize you have a choice." She looked at him, her gaze analytical, yet not unkind. "He put you in an impossible position. That's his signature move, his primary source of power. He isolates people and makes them believe their only option is capitulation." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the dining room, which was slowly returning to a low hum of conversation, every diner now a spectator with a story to tell. "But my audit stands. This incident has illuminated certain structural fragilities. A leader shouldn't be brought to that brink so easily. The foundation of this house must be stronger than the ego of its wealthiest guest." Julian nodded, a profound, weary acceptance settling over him. He wasn't being chastised, he was being taught. "Anything," he said, his voice thick with sincerity. "We will do anything. You've given us our soul back. Now tell us how to protect it." "Good," Ilara said, a flicker of the director returning to her eyes. "Then let's start with a gesture. The kitchen staff, the service team, they just endured a battle. Bring them a round of the 96 Krug Clodambonnet, and I want you to open the bottle and pour the first glass for your dishwasher, in front of everyone." Julian's eyes widened, understanding dawning. It wasn't a celebration, it was a statement, a reordering of values. "Yes, Director," he said, the title now fitting perfectly. As he turned to carry out the order, Ilara walked not towards the exit, but towards the swinging doors of the kitchen. She needed a moment away from the eyes, the whispers. Inside, the ballet of the kitchen had paused, chefs in their tall toques and line cooks in stained aprons stood by their stations, silent. The clatter and hiss of their work had been replaced by a heavy, expectant quiet. She unfastened her apron, the one with the faint orange stain that had started a war, and folded it neatly, placing it on a steel prep counter. It felt like a final, symbolic shedding of a skin. She was no longer an observer. She was in charge. The thought brought no elation, only a crushing, terrifying weight. Sterling Blackwood did not hear the applause as he was ushered onto the sidewalk. He heard only a high-pitched ringing in his ears, the shriek of his own nervous system in revolt. The crisp autumn air felt like an assault. The city lights of Manhattan, usually a glittering testament to his domain, seemed to mock him, each one a tiny, sharp point of judgment. His two associates, and the woman with the cold diamonds had already vanished, melting into the night and hailing separate cabs, their desertion as swift and silent as a predator's retreat. He stood alone on the curb, his bespoke suit feeling like a costume. The security guard had not touched him, yet he felt bruised, manhandled, violated. He, Sterling Blackwood, had been ejected. The concept was so alien, it refused to compute. His world was a series of doors that opened for him, of velvet ropes that were unclipped at his approach. To have a door shut in his face, it was a fundamental law of his personal physics being broken. His driver pulled the Maybach to the curb, the man's face a perfect, impassive mask. Sterling slid into the cavernous leather interior, the scent of polished wood and wealth a familiar comfort that now felt hollow. "Home, Mr. Blackwood?" the driver asked. Sterling didn't answer. He stared out the window at the warm, glowing facade of the gilded Quill. He could see silhouettes moving inside. He imagined them celebrating his departure. The thought was a hot spike of acid in his gut. His phone, which he had snatched from the floor in his ignominious retreat, began to vibrate. He looked at the screen. It was Arthur Pendleton, the patriarch of the private equity firm that had backed his first major acquisition 20 years ago. Pendleton was old money, a dinosaur from the Rockefeller era, a man whose approval Sterling had craved his entire career. Answering was an instinct. "Arthur," he said, trying to inject his usual booming confidence into his voice. It came out as a croak. "Sterling?" Pendleton's voice was thin and dry, like old parchment. There were no pleasantries. "I have just received a call from Jonathan Hemlock. He was agitated. It's a misunderstanding, Arthur. A complete fabrication by some power-hungry little girl who—" "The little girl," Pendleton cut in, his voice dropping a full octave, becoming lethally cold, "is Arthur Vance's daughter. And the Aurelian Syndicate is not a business, Sterling. It is a religion. You, in your infinite arrogance, have just spat on their altar during high mass. Jonathan tells me there were witnesses. A full dining room. They're nobodies. Diners. They are the board members of half the companies in your portfolio, you fool." Pendleton's voice was no longer cold, it was furious. They are the investors you court, the society pages you so desperately want to be in. You haven't just insulted a waitress, Sterling. You have committed a mortal sin of class. You behaved like a brutish parvenu. You were vulgar. Vulgar. The word struck Blackwood with the force of a physical blow. It was the one accusation he could not defend against, the one fear that haunted the heart of his new money empire. He had spent decades cultivating a veneer of aristocratic taste, buying the art, the wine, the clothes, and in one evening he had stripped it all away and shown them the snarling, hungry beast beneath. "Our board will be meeting tomorrow morning at 7, Pendleton continued, his voice once again a dispassionate blade. "The primary item on the agenda will be the immediate invocation of the character and reputational risk clause in your management contract. We are divesting, completely. I suggest you have your lawyer present." The line went dead. Sterling stared at the phone. It was just the first call. He knew, with a certainty that chilled his bone marrow, that it was the first tremor of a catastrophic earthquake. His empire, which he had always imagined as a fortress of granite and steel, was actually a house of cards, and the foundation wasn't money. It was reputation. It was the carefully constructed myth of Sterling Blackwood, the man with impeccable taste and an instinct for success. He had just personally taken a sledgehammer to that myth. He looked up at the gilded quill again. He had wanted to possess it, to brand it with his name. Now, it was a monument to his own destruction. He hadn't been cast out of a restaurant. He had been excommunicated from his own life. The next morning, Elara walked into the syndicate's headquarters for the first time as its true director. The offices were discreet, located in a historic limestone building in Midtown, marked only by a small, unassuming brass plaque. It was a world away from the frantic energy of a restaurant kitchen. Here the air was cool and still, smelling of old paper, lemon polish, and quiet, immense power. Her father's office was exactly as he had left it. A vast mahogany desk, walls lined with first-edition culinary texts, and a single large window overlooking the spires of St. Patrick's Cathedral. For 6 months, she had avoided this room, feeling like an imposter. Today, she walked in and felt not ownership, but a profound and terrifying responsibility. The 12 trustees were waiting for her in the boardroom, seated around a long, polished table. They were the secret arbiters of global taste, powerful figures from the worlds of finance, law, and academia, all bound by a sacred oath to the syndicate's principles. Jonathan Hemlock sat among them, his face pale and drawn, looking 10 years older than he had the day before. He did not meet her gaze. Elara took her seat at the head of the table, in the chair that had been her father's. She was not wearing a power suit, but a simple black dress. She did not need to dress for the part. She was the part. "Good morning," she said, her voice calm and measured, echoing slightly in the silent room. "I assume you have all been briefed on the events of last night at the Gilded Quill." A murmur of assent went around the table. "Mr. Hemlock," she said, her eyes finally locking onto his. "Your decision to leak the story to the press was an act of self-preservation, not institutional integrity. It was reactive. We are going to be proactive." Hemlock flinched but nodded his assent. "The incident with Mr. Blackwood is not the disease," Elara continued, her hands resting flat on the table. "It is a symptom of a sickness that has been growing in our industry for years, the belief that money is a substitute for merit, that a brand is more important than a craft, that people are disposable. Mr. Blackwood is not an anomaly. He is merely the loudest and most arrogant practitioner of a toxic philosophy. Therefore, our response cannot be limited to him. She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of each trustee. We are not just launching an investigation into the Blackwood Restaurant Group. We are launching a full-scale audit of every multi-property restaurant group that holds our stars. We will create a new set of standards, an ethical charter. We will evaluate establishments not just on the quality of their consommé, but on the treatment of their staff, the transparency of their sourcing, and the character of their leadership. We will add a new category to our inspection reports: hospitality integrity. The room was silent. This was revolutionary. For 50 years, the syndicate had focused almost exclusively on the plate. Ilara was proposing a radical expansion of their very mission. "Some will call this an overreach," she said, preempting their objections. "The traditionalists will be horrified. But my father created the stars to celebrate excellence, and excellence cannot exist in a toxic environment. It cannot be sustained by fear. A beautiful dish that comes from a place of misery is a lie. We will no longer sanction lies." She stood up. "Our investigation into Blackwood will be the template. I want teams assembled by the end of the day. I want interviews scheduled with current and former employees. I want a full forensic accounting of their supply chains. We will be thorough, we will be relentless, and we will be fair. But make no mistake, the age of the celebrity bully is over. We are the guardians of this world. It's time we started acting like it." She left the boardroom, leaving the 12 most powerful people in the culinary world sitting in stunned, energized silence. In her father's office, she looked out the window. The city sprawled before her. She had never wanted this power, but now that she had been forced to claim it, she would wield it not as a crown, but as a tool, a very, very sharp tool. The unraveling of Sterling Blackwood was not a swift, clean execution. It was a slow, public autopsy. Ilara's investigation, methodical and merciless, unearthed a rot that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. The stories came flooding in, first as a trickle, then as a deluge. Chefs spoke of being forced to use inferior, frozen products in Michelin-starred kitchens. Sommeliers revealed how Blackwood had them pushing massively marked up, mediocre wines on unsuspecting diners. Waitstaff and bussers, many of them immigrants, described a culture of wage theft and verbal abuse, backed by threats of deportation. The most damning testimony came from a man named Antoine Dubois, a brilliant, classically trained chef who had been the creative force behind Blackwood's 3-star flagship in Chicago. He came to Ilara's office with a ledger. In it, he had meticulously documented every cost-cutting desecration he had been forced to commit, replacing Normandy butter with a domestic blend, swapping wild-caught turbot for farmed tilapia, using truffle oil instead of actual truffles. He called it optimizing the guest experience. Chef Dubois told Ilara, his voice trembling with a rage he had suppressed for years. He was killing the food. He was killing me. Every night, I would serve a plate of lies to people who had saved for months to eat in my restaurant. I am a chef. My integrity is all I have. He took it from me. The ledger became the centerpiece of a devastating exposé in the New York Times. Blackwood's carefully crafted image shattered. He was no longer a brilliant tycoon. He was a con artist. His investors fled. His partners sued. His remaining restaurants, now tainted by scandal, sat empty. He became a prisoner in his own penthouse, the city outside his window no longer a kingdom, but a jury. 3 months later, at the annual Aurelian Star Gala, the final judgment was rendered. Ilara, standing at the podium, looked out at the assembled chefs, critics, and restaurateurs. She never said Blackwood's name. She didn't need to, She spoke of trust, of integrity, and of the sacred duty of hospitality. When she announced the permanent revocation of all 12 stars from the Blackwood Group and the lifetime ban of its principal, a wave of applause rolled through the grand hall. It was not the sound of vindication or revenge. It was the sound of restoration, the sound of an industry reclaiming its soul. 6 months to the day after the incident, Elara returned to the Gilded Quill. She came in the late afternoon, between the lunch and dinner services. The dining room was quiet, bathed in the soft, golden light of the setting sun. Julian met her at the door. He looked like a different man. The weary tension in his shoulders was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. He was no longer a manager fighting a losing battle. He was a custodian of a place he loved. He walked her through the restaurant. The changes were subtle but profound. He showed her the newly renovated staff quarters, which were now bright and spacious, with comfortable seating and proper lockers. He showed her the new profit-sharing chart posted in the kitchen, where every employee, from the head chef to the dishwasher, had a stake in their collective success. "We have a new rule," Julian said, leading her back into the dining room. He pointed to a small, elegant brass plaque by the host stand. It read, "Our hospitality is a conversation of respect. We welcome all who engage in it with kindness." "It's better than a dress code," Elara said, a genuine smile touching her lips. "Your father would have liked that, I think," Julian said. "He would have," she agreed. He led her to table 12, the secluded booth in the alcove. The table was set for one. "I thought it was time you experienced this place from the right side of the table," he said. She sat down, the plush leather a world away from the hard wooden chairs in the staff break room. A young woman approached, her movements graceful and assured. She had a bright, open face and a genuine smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am," the waitress said. "My name is Chloe. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. May I start you with some water? Still or sparkling?" Elara looked at Chloe. She saw not a function, not a pair of hands, but a person. A young professional, proud of her work, in a place that valued her. She looked at Julian, who was watching from a distance, his face filled with pride. She thought of the journey that had brought her here, the grief for her father, the crushing weight of his legacy, the fear of her own inadequacy. She had gone undercover, seeking to understand his world, and in the process had been forced to redefine it. She had not simply inherited his throne. She had rebuilt it on a stronger foundation. "Sparkling would be lovely, Chloe," Elara said, her voice clear and warm. "Thank you. I have a feeling everything is going to be wonderful."